When I attend a Flat Earth event, I often say it feels like a family reunion of long-lost family members I never knew I had. This was literally the case with Bob Knodel. Check this out. Here's me on the left and Bob on the right. Then there's my mom and his mom, my grandpa and his grandma, our great-grandparents, our great-great-grandparents, our great-great-great-grandparents, and you kind of get the picture from here. So our nearest common ancestor can be found 12 generations back. That makes him my 10th cousin. To which you might ask, how does that work? Well, first cousins are two people who have different moms but have the same grandparent. So in this case, we count the generations all the way back to our common ancestor and subtract the first two generations. This makes Bob my 10th cousin. And sometimes family lines are not perfectly even like this. For example, if I were to draw in my daughter below me, there would be a one generation gap between her and Bob. So the term for this is once removed. My daughter would be Bob's 10th cousin once removed. And someday, when my kids have kids, my grandkids will be Bob's 10th cousins twice removed. And then it just adds on with each next generation. I don't really like the term removed because it sounds like you're kicking someone out of the family with each generation, but that's not what it means. Anyway, going back to our nearest common ancestors, Samuel Watson and Elizabeth Thompson. Check this out. Samuel Watson died in Ireland in 1732. Here's that spot on the map, and it looks like his wife died in the same location. Now here is Susanna Watson, who died in 1743 in colonial Pennsylvania, back before the Revolutionary War in 1773, when the United States fought to become a nation. Next, her daughter Elizabeth Carleton, who immigrated with her from Ireland, died in 1760, further south in colonial North Carolina. After that, Elizabeth's son Joshua, who was born while they were still in Pennsylvania, died in 1798, also in North Carolina. He was someone who lived through the Revolutionary War. Here's a picture of Joshua's grave. It wasn't the war, though, that influenced their move from Pennsylvania to North Carolina. Their house in Pennsylvania actually caught fire, and they lost just about everything except for their family Bible, which miraculously survived. At the time, they were Quakers, and after the catastrophe, they turned to the Quaker Church. And then there was a dispute about which Quaker congregation the family was a part of, which didn't make them feel very welcome in either one. So with permission from the Quaker Church to move to another community, they moved to North Carolina, and then they didn't show their moving certificate to any of the Quakers in North Carolina, essentially ghosting them and leaving the Quaker Church. Joshua's son William was born in North Carolina and died there in the year 1860. The American Civil War took place in 1861, but William's son James was not really involved with that because he was heavily influenced by the teachings of the Book of Mormon and the prophet Joseph Smith, which led him to move away to Missouri to be with the other members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where he then joined the pioneers in moving to Utah. He died in 1892, right before Utah became a state in 1896. His daughter Margaret joined him on his trek and died in 1907 in the same area. The church, however, was growing really fast and didn't want all the people to live in the same area, so they told the people to spread out, and Margaret's son Henry died in 1944 in Pocatello, Idaho. World War I was in 1914, the Great Depression in 1929, and World War II was in 1939. So he lived through all three of them and died at the age of 75. As for his son Leroy, Idaho got too cold for him, so he moved his family out to Glendale, Arizona. It was quite the trip, but unlike our Quaker ancestors, when he got there, the first place he took his family was to the church, where he remained active for the rest of his life. His son is my grandpa, who is still alive today, living in the same area of Arizona. Though he did take his family and move around quite a bit throughout his life, moving out to Wisconsin and even as far out as a little tiny island named Tonga near Australia. But eventually he came back to Arizona, and from the looks of it, that's where he's going to be when he dies. Next is my mom, who grew up traveling all over with her family. But after getting married, she wanted to be closer to her family members on her mom's side. So she moved to Hurricane, Utah, which is where she lives today. And then there's me. I met my amazing wife in Hurricane, and wanting to continue to live near family, that is the general area where we live today. And now, with permission from Bob's amazing wife Cammie, let's go check out Bob's family line and see their family history. Alright, so we're back in Ireland again between the years 1650 and 1740. And I'm curious when our ancestors joined the Quaker movement. Was that in Ireland, or was that after? I'll go ahead and check the sources to see if they are any help. England Parish Registers. Is that the Church of England? I don't know. I don't know why they would be in the Irish Quaker index books if they weren't Quakers back then. This particular link is dead, so I'm gonna have to look for some other sources here. One of the reasons why I have to ask when they became Quakers is because I'm not really familiar with the idea of Irish Quakers. That is quite a different picture in my mind than the way they are usually depicted in the media. And when I think of Irish history, I was under the impression that they were mostly Catholic. And then I just recently heard that the Irish for some time were being caught and sold as slaves in the American colonies. So they just become slaves and then convert into Quakerism after they got to the Americas?
During the 1650s, over 100,000 Irish children between the ages of 10 and 14 were taken from their families and sold as slaves in the West Indies, Virginia, and New England. Shockingly, more Irish were sold as slaves to the American colonies from 1651 to 1660 than the total free population of the Americas at that time. Cromwell's policy of enslaving the Irish continued, with the infamous To Hell or to Connacht proclamation in 1654 confiscating all Irish-held lands and relocating native Irish west of the Shannon or transporting them to the West Indies. Those who failed to comply were banished to America or other overseas locations, and those who returned were punished with death. Although soldiers were encouraged to kill the Irish people, the slave trade proved to be too profitable to ignore. As a result, 52,000 Irish were sold to Barbados and Virginia, and an additional 30,000 were taken prisoner and sold as slaves. In 1656, Cromwell's Council of State ordered the rounding up of 1,000 Irish girls and 1,000 Irish boys to be taken to Jamaica and sold as slaves to the English planters. The extent of the Irish slave trade was likely even greater, as little record was kept of this activity. The forced enslavement of the Irish people is a tragic and often overlooked part of history, which had a profound impact on the Irish and the American people.
So yeah, that's pretty interesting, and it makes me want to take a much closer look at their history. Were they slaves? I'll click on Sarah here and see how many kids she had, and if any immigrated over to the Americas with her. It looks like her oldest lived his entire life out in Ireland, telling me that she immigrated over here without him. That would be tough, coming here and leaving kids behind. Now, Elizabeth was born in Ireland, but died in South Carolina. Did they get split up because of slavery? We don't know anything about Samuel here. And we don't know much about Mary. Now let's take a closer look at this daughter who died out in South Carolina. Diana was an immigrant. Died in North Carolina. Joseph, don't know. But he was born in Ireland, which says something about how old Mom was when she immigrated to the Americas. Thomas, born in Ireland, but don't know where he died. Samuel, an immigrant who died in South Carolina. John, an immigrant who died in South Carolina. Henry, an immigrant who died in Ohio. Sarah, an immigrant who died in North Carolina. And last we have Robert, who was another immigrant who died in South Carolina. And keep in mind, those were a bunch of Sarah Watson's grandkids, telling us that Sarah Watson was a grandma when she immigrated to the Americas. And this grandma immigrated to the Americas with her sister Susanna. And Susanna came over with her children, but didn't come over with any grandchildren. So this is what our group of immigrants is looking like, plus their families. Some of them might have been indentured servants, but I'm feeling pretty comfortable in ruling out slavery at this point. This says, the first Irish immigrants to Pennsylvania arrived in 1682, in the very first ship that brought William Penn's Quakers to his new land. They were servants brought with families who had fled to Ireland to avoid religious persecution in England. For the next 60 years, most Irish who arrived in Pennsylvania were indentured, often skilled workers whose labor was desperately needed in the colony, but who could immigrate only if they agreed to work unpaid for food and shelter, working for their sponsors for 7 years. Most indentured Irish immigrants became one of two types of citizens: tough, adventurous backwoodsmen, often who had fled into the wilderness from slave-like conditions before their indenture was finished, who became long rifle sharpshooters of Washington's army, or skilled tradesmen and merchants who settled in the southeastern part of the colony and became vocal opponents to the British monarchy and leaders of the revolutionary movement. I'm not sure how accurate this is in describing our family, though it might describe some parts of our family, but Quakers were pacifists. And when we look at Henry Milhouse over there, we can find that he was a son of Robert Milhouse. And according to this book, Robert Milhouse was one of the leaders in the Quaker Church. Unless Henry suddenly fell away from that, I'm pretty sure we can outrule much involvement between their family and the Revolutionary War. The American Revolutionary War was in 1775, and the US became a nation in 1776. So this would have taken place in Henry's life, but not in Elizabeth's. So, Bob and my common ancestors were from Ireland. This was Samuel Watson and Elizabeth Thompson. Of their children, they had 2 daughters who both immigrated over to the Americas and died in Pennsylvania. Their grandchildren then started to drift apart a little bit, one dying in North Carolina and the other one dying out in South Carolina. This orange line is my family line, and this red one is going to be Bob's. And this is that dividing point. From here, Elizabeth had a son named Henry Milhouse, and he died all the way out in Ohio. Exactly what inspired him to move to Ohio, I don't know. He then had a daughter named Sarah, who died in Indiana. In my line, they left the Quaker Church, but I don't know how long they stuck with it on Bob's line. Sarah had a daughter named Anna, who died in Iowa. So we are seeing a lot of generational movement here. The American Civil War took place in 1861, so Anna would have lived through that. Though Anna died in Iowa, I noticed she was born in South Carolina, which makes me wonder how much of the Civil War she saw. Anna had a bunch of brothers who were also born in South Carolina, though most of them were born pretty close to the year 1800, meaning if they fought in the Civil War, they would have been a bunch of 60-year-old men, which isn't quite the picture I see when I visualize the men who fought in the Civil War. Their kids might have fought in it though. As for Anna's kids, it says her oldest was born in England, and we don't know where he died. That could be a mistake, I don't know. We don't know where Mary was born or where she died. Her daughter Anna was born in Ohio and died in Arkansas. And Eli was born in Ohio and died in Iowa. So there's a lot of family movement taking place at this time, jumping the Civil War boundaries in both directions. And it would seem not everyone stuck together and followed an exact successive line here, but rather at one time they lived in South Carolina, and then the family exploded out of there with different people landing in different parts of the country. Nonetheless, the line shows where each of the ancestors died generation by generation. Anna's son Eli was born in Ohio and died in Iowa. So it would seem his mom didn't exactly follow a straight path from South Carolina to Iowa, which tells me that there was some secession there. Eli then had a daughter named Sarah, who appears to have lived her entire life out in Iowa. She died at the age of 68, 1 year after World War I broke out. Sarah's daughter Mary lived through World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II, which may have had some influence on the family's decision to suddenly move out to Huntington Beach, California. Be it because someone joined the military, or they just moved out Grapes of Wrath style. Mary was Bob's great-grandma. She had 10 kids, and all of them were born out in Iowa, and at least 4 of them made the trip with her to California. Of the 10 kids was Aletha, Bob's grandma, who was born in Iowa and died in Colorado. Exactly what took them to Colorado, I don't know, but I do know that her sister Marie also went with her to Colorado. One of Aletha's daughters was Bob's mom Marceline, who was born in Iowa and died near her mom in Colorado. And this brings us to Bob, who was born in Denver, Colorado. And then he and his wife Cammie moved out to South Carolina. And exactly what inspired that move is something I'll have to ask Cammie about. Though we were geographically far apart, I came to know my long-lost cousin Bob through Globebusters and the Flat Earth movement, for which I will be forever grateful. It is an honor to have you as my cousin, Bob. You will be long remembered. This video is brought to you by the Flat Earth Institute of Science, with a special thank you to FamilySearch.org for making this video possible. And now there's one more really cool thing I've got to show you. This is Bob and mine's nearest common ancestor 12 generations back. Now check out how far back it goes. Adam and Eve. That is amazing. Glory be to the Father in all things. Thank you all for watching.